Well, hello and welcome back. My name's Rob Timmings from ECT for Health, and we're back with another KYJ, Knowing Your Jargon. This is part 2 of a 3-part series that we started on understanding haemostasis. Now, if you saw video 1, which you should have seen video 1, this will make a whole lot more sense if you look at the first video. Then you would have seen that we went through the very first step in the process of haemostasis, which is called vasoconstriction. So vasoconstriction, pretty much done and dusted. Let's put a line through that. Clotting, that's what we're going to be talking about today. And just a little bit of a recap. We talked about how the blood vessel contains a number of different layers. The intimate internal layer, which is a single cell thick layer of cells that does all sorts of funky stuff like releasing platelet repellents and heparin and nitric oxide to cause vasodilation. In this step, we're going to talk about the platelets, and the platelets are the key players. Thrombocytes, platelets, same thing. They're the key players in the process that we call clotting, stage 2 in our haemostasis. So let's understand a platelet. A platelet is a tiny little cell, spherical in shape, traveling through your plasma. These cells are made like many of our other blood cells are made in bone marrow, although there's some good evidence to suggest that a sizable portion of platelets are made inside your lungs. And these platelets are very small. You could fit 3 to 4 of these platelets on the inside of every red blood cell. So tiny little cells. They don't have a nucleus, so they're unable to reproduce. They're more sort of protein shells with active substances on the inside of them that can respond chemically and create chemicals that become very vasoactive or active in your bloodstream. These platelets float along inside your bloodstream in a dormant state. They're ready to be activated, and what they're activated by is collagen. They love to stick to collagen. A little bit like walking past a Krispy Kreme shop. You just can't stop. You've got to go in and check it out. You're sort of attracted to the Krispy Kreme shop. Well, platelets are very, very similar. If I have damage to this endothelial surface here, that we can see this endothelial cell that I've got here, if I had damage to it, let's give it a little bit of damage. We've got a bit of an injury that's occurred to this endothelial cell surface, and now we've got this jagged, damaged piece of endothelium, a damaged piece of endothelium. Most importantly, what I've got exposed here is this underlying collagen layer. And there is nothing that platelets love more than to be able to come along and stick to that collagen. And so the moment that you damage the inside of a blood vessel wall, you immediately start to form a raft of these platelets that will come along, and they will start to stick to that collagen. And when that happens, platelets get so excited and they start to secrete a chemical. And what that chemical does is that attracts other platelets to come along, and it changes the surface of the platelet into what kind of looks like a little bit like a gnarly little starfish. So all these little appendages, pseudopodia, start to come out of this platelet. And I don't know if you remember playing that game as a kid called Barrel of Monkeys, where you had these little plastic monkeys that you used to hook together arm by arm. Well, platelets are a little bit like that. In an inactive form, platelets don't have these little appendages, and so when they bump into each other floating along in your bloodstream, they don't really do anything. They don't stick to each other. But when they've got these little sticky arms because they've been activated, then that allows for these platelets now to start to stick to one another. Platelets secrete chemicals into the bloodstream, and what those chemicals do is a couple of things. ADP, adenosine diphosphate, will call other platelets to come to the area. This movement or this attraction of platelets that are just aimlessly floating along in the bloodstream are attracted to come to this area where there is a clot starting to form. And that's in response to this chemical called ADP that platelets, once they've been activated and got excited about the collagen, will start to release. Another chemical that's released from platelets is a chemical which causes the coagulation process. So it stimulates coagulation. And this is a chemical that is called Thromboxane A2. So I'll just write that one down up here. Let's get rid of that platelet. He's in my way. Thromboxane A2. Now, many of you will be familiar, many of you will be familiar with this, with the fact that when we give aspirin to a patient that we need to give aspirin to, one of the properties of aspirin is that it stops platelets from being able to stick to one another. Many people say that when they take aspirin, they bruise really easily, or they have difficulty in slowing down their bleeding. If they scratch themselves, their clot forms a lot slower. And that's because what aspirin does is it stops the platelet being able to make that thromboxane. Thromboxane does a couple of things. It stimulates the coagulation process, and we'll go through that in the next video, but it also stimulates these muscles down here in the muscle wall of the blood vessel to actually further cause vasoconstriction. So you can see that vasoconstriction is the first step of haemostasis, of slowing down the bleeding, but as platelets start to clump and form that first clot, the clotting process, then what these platelets are actually going to do is actually further fuel that vasoconstrictive process by releasing this thromboxane A2 chemical that actually stimulates vasoconstriction to become tighter and tighter, narrowing the blood vessels, slowing the blood flow, and making it easier for these platelets that have already started to clump to actually now form a significant clot. Platelets also secrete substances that stimulate the coagulation process. And that coagulation process is one that's going to cause a fibrin to form. And this fibrin is this little stringy strand of protein that forms out of the liquid plasma. That process is called coagulation, and that's going to be our next video. So in short, platelets, tiny little blood cells, completely dormant, floating through your bloodstream, but the moment you've damaged a blood vessel, then they see that exposed collagen, that excites them like a Krispy Kreme shop, get excited, and they rush to that collagen, they stick to the collagen, and they activate, and they become prickly and spiky. They send out ADP to start to call other platelets to come rushing to the area, come and enjoy the clot forming party, and they send out and secrete this thromboxane A2 to stimulate the coagulation process and to further fuel that vasoconstriction. That, in a nutshell, is clotting, and it's the second step that occurs within our haemostasis process. Join us next time for part 3 as we go through the coagulation.